You made the White Walkers.
We were at war. We were being slaughtered. Our sacred trees cut down. We needed to defend ourselves.
From whom?
From you. From men.
Hello, my sweet summer children. I'm back with some juice to get you through the long night. Today we are going to talk about the timeline in Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire. The official timeline is debated quite often. I'm not sure if you heard the podcast episode with Tony, LML, Quinn, and I, but we were all kind of disagreed with each other on the timeline.
White Walkers initially came, the Pact was made, and they came again.
No.
Yes.
No.
It's Pact,
Yes.
White Walkers, and then White Walkers again.
Yeah, White
No,
Walkers
so Old Nan says that she describes the first long night, the only long night that's ever described, and she says that in that darkness, the others came for the first time.
they
so-
came, but before.
I don't understand how there's any confusion
Okay.
about this.
I just think that we just talked about that we're going to go with the book canon. The book canon says specifically the timeline of what happened. So to try to change the timeline is something that we just said we weren't going to do.
No, that's
It's
not
okay
at all.
right now,
No.
right?
I said we can all have our own theories about disagreeing with the official timeline. We just need to agree on what the official timeline is before we then propose our theories about how it might be wrong.
It happens. And it's because the timeline makes no sense in the whole scheme of things. The official timeline we are given, which official should have air quotes around it in my opinion, but we find out from Samwell Tarly that this official timeline is not reliable. The oldest histories we have were written after the Andals came to Westeros. The first men only left us runes on rocks, so everything we think we know about the Age of Heroes and the Dawn Age and the Long Night comes from accounts set down by Septons thousands of years later. There are archmaesters at the Citadel who question all of it. Those old histories are full of kings who reigned for hundreds of years, and knights riding around 1,000 years before there were knights. You know the tales, Brandon the Builder, Simon Star-Eyes, Night's King. We say that you're the 998th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, but the oldest list I've found shows 674 commanders. So if we look at this quote, the oldest histories we have in the story come from High Septons thousands of years after the events actually happened. The High Septons, of course, are priests of the Faith of the Seven, the Andal religion. The Andals invaded Westeros and conquered it for the most part and wrote history however they saw fit. The things they have actually written as history is impossible to be true. According to the history that the Septons have passed down, kings lived for hundreds of years, and even before knights existed, there were knights riding around, which means it's impossible. George is basically telling us with this quote that we should question the timeline. We shouldn't trust it. We need to look at it deeper. We're going to examine the things that Sam specifically mentions in this quote. That's the Age of Heroes, the Dawn Age, the Long Night, Brandon the Builder, Simon Star-Eyes, and the Night's King. So the official timeline we start with, it's the Dawn Age of Westeros. The children of the Forest and the Giants are roaming Westeros like the real world dinosaur era. So the children of the Forest and the Giants would have wars with each other, but they were like minor wars and squabbles. They weren't trying to eradicate each other's race. At one point, Westeros had a land bridge that connected Westeros and Essos. This land bridge is where the first men crossed the narrow sea to come to Westeros from Essos. We don't know for sure where the first men came from and why, but many maesters of the Citadel believe they came from the grasslands of what is now known as the Dothraki Sea, or somewhere in that general area. They could have been chased away from there like many other people, like chased out of Essos, but those other people, the Andals and the Rhonar, were chased to Westeros because of the Valyrian tide. They were chased to Westeros because Valyria was on the rise. The Valyrians were taking their dragons out and they were conquering Westeros. And the Rhonar and the Andals didn't want to be a part of that, so they fled to Westeros. Maybe the first men coming to Westeros is more central to our own history. Allegedly, for us, around 125,000 BC, wandering groups of humans left Africa during the last ice age. Those ancient humans reached other continents via land bridges. And they did this to look for food. They just wanted food. So we know Martin loves history, so maybe the first men left Essos because the grasslands had little food to offer and they crossed the land bridge into Dorne for no other reason than food. But maybe it's not that simple. Maybe they were trying to escape something. Maybe. But let's keep going. So the first men arrived to Westeros. The oldest records available say that the arrival of the first men was 12,000 years ago, but there are runic records that date to men being in Westeros way longer than this. The first men brought with them weapons of bronze, boiled leather, and the first horses of Westeros. At this time, the first men also had their own god, and they brought it with them. This was before they took the old gods as their religion. So the first men come to Westeros, and they start to build, but there are already native people that live there, those native people being the children of the forest and the giants. The first men start to cut down the sacred trees of the children of the forest, and this starts a war between the children of the forest that lasts 2,000 years. The official timeline says this is where the children of the forest were driven by desperation to use dark magic and call down the hammer of the waters to stem the tide of the invaders, to separate Westeros from Essos and destroy the land bridge and flood the neck so the invaders or the first men could not move north. It is said that the children fed 1,000 captives to the weirwoods, and a grislier version says that the children of the forest actually fed their own young to the weirwood trees. Allegedly, the first men were winning these wars until the two sides reached a peace agreement and the pact was formed on the Isle in the God's Eye, the Isle of Faces. This pact started 4,000 years of friendship. So 4,000 years after this pact is the first time that the White Walkers came, according to Old Nan. This is where I wholeheartedly disagree with the timeline that we are presented with, because it just doesn't make sense. We are told that the first men and the children had started this pact after they were at war for so many years, but it wasn't until after this, 2,000 to 4,000 years after this pact, that the Long Night occurred. Why would the children of the forest create the White Walkers 2,000 to 4,000 years after the pact? If the realm is at peace, then actually this just doesn't make sense, but that's what we're told. But as I've said before, we are supposed to question this. That's why Sam brings it up, or should I say that's why George R.R. Martin brings it up. In the show, we are specifically shown the children of the forest creating the first White Walker, or the Night King, in a flashback from Bran. And Leaf tells Bran that they created him because they were at war with men. Now, the show could have totally made this creation of the Night King up, which I don't think, but I definitely think that they simplified it. And I think we can all agree that the Night King or the others definitely come from the children of the forest. And I think at this point that should be canon. But did it really happen like that? Did it really happen how the show presented? The show made Leaf like this Azor Ahai figure, plunging her dagger of dragonglass through the Night King's heart and making him Lightbringer, like a reverse Nisa. Think about it. The children were in peril. Those were dark days for the children of the forest. They were facing extinction. They were being slaughtered, and he was going to be their savior, the Lightbringer to end their darkness. However, let me explain why I disagree with the timeline and what I think actually happened. We're going to get into the Night King and Simon Star Eyes and Brandon the Builder in a minute, but first, let me tell you an alternate version to the simplified version we were shown on TV. When you look at the children of the forest, we usually lump them together as like one group of people, but in actuality, there were probably multiple tribes of children of the forest. Society or mankind, whatever you want to call it, there are different factions amongst all groups of people and different places. And George writes like this as well. There are examples of this with Volantis. Volantis has like political groups like the tigers and the elephants and different people that support different things. Bravos has harbors that specifically cater to certain groups of people depending on their lineage or social standing. We see it with the 13 of Karth. We see it with Valyria before the Doom. Multiple families or tribes ruled Valyria. We see this all through Westeros with different sectors of the land ruled by feudalism. We see it in the real world. So the children of the forest shouldn't be any different. They probably had multiple tribes, and some of those tribes were extreme or went to extremes because they felt like they had to save their race. So they worked some very dark magic. Finally, driven by desperation, the little people turned to sorcery and beseeched their greenseers to stem the tide of these invaders. And so they did, gathering in their hundreds, some say on the Isle of Faces, and calling on their old gods with song and prayer and grisly sacrifice. 1,000 captive men were fed to the weirwood, one version of the tale goes, whilst another claims the children used blood of their own young. And the old gods stirred, and giants awoke in the earth, and all of Westeros shook and trembled. Great cracks appeared in the earth, and hills and mountains collapsed and were swallowed up. And then the seas came rushing in, and the arm of Dorne was broken and shattered by the force of the water, until only a few bare rocky islands remained above the waves. So the children had green seers, right? Green seers can see the future, right? Why would they sacrifice 1,000 of their own young or use such dark magic when they knew, because they're green seers that can see the future, that using the hammers of the waters would only slow down the first men? It wouldn't stop them. What's more likely to have happened is the children didn't just break the arm of Dorne or call down the hammers of the waters. They made the White Walkers. They made the White Walkers. And the magic was so powerful that it totally threw the world into a chaotic state of unbalanced climate. The power behind the magic they used to create the White Walkers basically caused a natural disaster, which was breaking the arm of Dorne. Because if you think about it, a White Walker is a perfect weapon for the children of the Forest to choose. The children are given long lives, but there aren't a lot of them. They were losing the war because their weapons were weak compared to what the first men had, but the biggest reason they were losing was because there wasn't a lot of them. They were being overrun by the first men. The first men had the numbers. So what's the perfect strategy? To turn the first men's numbers against them. Everyone they lose is a gain for the children of the Forest. So the first White Walker is created during the wars with men. The first men and the children before the Pact, not after the Pact. Even though we're told that this happens after the Pact, I think the White Walkers are created before the Pact. There were supposedly thousands of captives fed to the trees, or 1,000 of the children's own young fed to the trees. But also, I believe there was some kind of Nissa type of situation that happened on top of these sacrifices. And Nissa didn't die. She became a White Walker. She became the Night Queen. Now, this is where the Pact comes into play. The wisest of both races prevailed, and the chief heroes and rulers of both sides met upon an isle in the God's Eye to form the Pact. Giving up all lands of Westeros save for the deep forest, the children won from the first men the promise that they would no longer cut down the weirwoods. All the weirwoods of the isle on which the pact was forged were then carved with the faces so that gods could witness the pact. And the order of the green men was made afterward to tend to the weirwoods and protect the isle. Now, this says that the wisest of both races, which means that some people on both sides didn't agree with this shit. But the pact was made anyway on the Isle of Faces. So I believe part of this pact meant the wall would be built to keep the White Walkers in the north, partially for safety reasons for the first men, and then also because winter needs to remain in the north. Nature, which is what the children worship, cannot survive in winter conditions all the time. So the others had to be kept in the north, even if at this time the children had them under complete control. So Brandon the Builder constructs the wall with the children of the forest, and the first castle that's built is the Night Fort, where the Night King reigned. We are told that the Night King is the 13th Lord Commander, and he glimpsed a woman from atop the wall. A woman was his downfall. A woman glimpsed from atop the wall, with skin as white as the moon and eyes like blue stars. Fearing nothing, he chased her and caught her and loved her, though her skin was cold as ice, and when he gave his seed to her, he gave his soul as well. So this woman that he glimpsed was probably what remained of Nissa. She was now the Night's Queen, and the Night King fell for her, and this was the second interaction with White Walkers. Then we get the legend of Simon Star Eyes. We don't get much backstory on him or any story on him but from Bran. So according to legend, Simon Star Eyes went blind and replaced his eyes with blue sapphires shaped like stars. And he visits the Night Fort where he sees hellhounds fighting. How the hell did a blind man see hellhounds fighting? Hellhounds are like demon dogs. So it could have just been two wolves he saw fighting. More than likely, Starks. And he could have not actually been blind. He could have just been a White Walker as well. So you may be thinking, there's only one account of White Walkers. So how are you getting two accounts? Sam tells us not to trust the history. So look at this. The Game of Thrones history and lore videos, which are supposed to be based on the history and lore of A Song of Ice and Fire, they release a bunch of history and lore videos after every season. So you can probably find them on YouTube if you just type in Game of Thrones history and lore. They have a few particular lines in the Children of the Forest history and lore video that points to dealing with the White Walkers on 2 occasions, and 3 if you count where we are right now in the story. This time is the 3rd time that the White Walkers have been seen. The first time the White Walkers were seen was before the Pact, when the war with the First Men was going on.
The children couldn't win this war, and the First Men didn't want to win, fearing the costs of victory. Heroes and rulers on both sides met upon an isle in the God's Eye to form the Pact.
Then listen to this.
The great evil that the children unleashed in the war returned centuries later, and only an alliance between the children and men defeated it.
He says the great evil that the children unleashed returned centuries later. So returned means it was gone and it came back.
Now it comes again, when the children are a shadow of what they were.
And now he says it comes again. So the actual timeline, in my opinion, goes War of the Children and First Men, Long Night, Pact, Wall is built, and the second interaction with White Walkers happens with the Night King, and it's like the second Long Night. So let's look at it. Is the wall built overnight? No, it probably took years to build. Then after the wall was built, there were allegedly 12 other Lord Commanders before we get to the Night's King. So it said that the Night King reigned for 13 years. The Night's King is said to be only a man by day, and the night was his rule. So the Night's Queen and the Night's King were making babies and White Walkers and other shit. Think about it. The king in the north, Brandon the Breaker, is said to have linked up with the king beyond the wall, and I suppose all of this happened out of the kindness of their hearts? No, they were at war. Why do you need a magical horn to wake sleeping giants if the threat isn't that big and you're just fighting other men? That's not what's going on here. Why would the king in the north ever link up with the wildling king if the situation wasn't dire? Look what it took to get the wildlings and the Watch and the Northmen to cooperate right now. The Night's Watch killed Jon because of this. The Northern Lords disliked Jon because of this. Some of the Northern Lords refused to fight against the Boltons because Jon had a wildling army. So where does this leave us? Let me tell you exactly what I think happened. War of the First Men, White Walkers come, children are in complete control of White Walkers. The last generation of this war was the Long Night. Then the Pact is made, the wall is built, Night King comes around, finds Night's Queen. Night's King is a Stark, the brother of Brandon the Breaker. Starks had the warg gene in their blood. At this time, the White Walkers didn't have the ability to rise up and to fight to be free because they didn't have that power. But imagine this. Night's Queen gets the seed of Night's King, and they make an improved model. They made a hybrid, half man, half White Walker. And this is where Jormungand and the Wildlings and Brandon the Breaker and the Last Hero come into play. And I believe the Night's King was aided not only by the Night's Queen, but by that extremist faction of the Children of the Forest. And it's a hybrid version of a White Walker that we are seeing with the Night King. But I want to know, what do you think about the timeline? Do you trust it? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks to everyone that supports me on Patreon. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please click that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and join the Sweet Summer family. Okay, my sweet summer children, have a good day.
Shame. Shame. Shame.